The widow Penelope Lawson stood at the center of Fort Worth's dusty Main Street in the blazing Texas sun of 1877, her hands trembling as she clutched the letter from the town council, demanding she either remarry within 3 months or forfeit her late husband's ranch to pay fabricated debts. She had buried Thomas only 8 months ago, his body broken from a ranching accident that still haunted her dreams. And now these vultures wanted her to hand herself over to any man willing to take on a grieving woman and her small cattle operation. The paper crumpled in her fist as she watched the townspeople avert their eyes, whispering behind gloved hands about the stubborn widow who thought herself too good for a second husband. Penelope was 24 years old, though grief had carved lines around her green eyes that made her look older in certain lights. Her auburn hair, pinned severely beneath a black morning bonnet, caught fire in the afternoon sun as she walked past the general store where Martha Henderson and Susan Crawford pretended to examine fabric while clearly discussing her predicament. She held her head high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had loved Thomas with a fierce devotion, and the thought of replacing him like a worn-out saddle made her stomach turn. The ranch Thomas had built sat 5 miles outside town, a modest spread with decent grazing land, and a small herd of cattle that Penelope had managed to maintain with the help of 2 ranch hands. But those men had quit last week, spooked by rumors that working for an unmarried woman would bring bad luck or worse, ostracization from their peers. Now she worked the land alone, rising before dawn to feed the animals and mend fences, collapsing into bed each night too exhausted to do more than stare at the empty space beside her. She pushed through the doors of the mercantile, needing flour and coffee, steeling herself for whatever judgment awaited inside. The shopkeeper, Gerald Patterson, looked up from his ledger with barely concealed disdain. His wife had been one of the most vocal critics of Penelope's refusal to entertain the various suitors who had come sniffing around the ranch like dogs after a bone. Most of them were old widowers wanting a cook and someone to warm their bed, or young opportunists eyeing her land more than her person. "Mrs. Lawson," Patterson said, his tone clipped, "I hope you have cash today. I cannot extend any more credit to someone in your uncertain position." Heat flooded Penelope's cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "I have cash, Mr. Patterson. I always pay my debts." She placed her coins on the counter with perhaps more force than necessary and gathered her supplies. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a tall figure entering the store. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she looked up into a pair of warm brown eyes set in a sun-weathered face beneath a dusty black Stetson. "Pardon me, madam," the stranger said, his voice a low rumble with a hint of a southern drawl that suggested Georgia or perhaps Alabama. He released her immediately, stepping back to give her space. "Did not see you there." Penelope murmured something polite and hurried past him, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the near collision. She did not look back as she loaded her supplies into the wagon Thomas had built with his own hands, but she felt eyes on her the entire time. The stranger was Graham McKenna, though Penelope would not learn his name until later that evening when he appeared at her ranch, just as she was struggling to wrestle a broken section of fence back into place. The wood had splintered during the night, and 3 of her cattle had wandered onto the open range. She had spent the better part of the afternoon tracking them down and herding them back, and now she was fighting with wire and posts as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "That post is rotted through," a voice said behind her, and she spun around to find the man from the mercantile sitting astride a magnificent chestnut horse, his expression serious but not unkind. You are going to need to replace it entirely, or the whole section will come down again." Penelope wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her skin. "I thank you for the observation, but I did not ask for your opinion or your help." Graham dismounted in one fluid motion, looping his horse's reins over what remained of the fence post. "No, madam, you did not. But it would sit poorly with me to ride past someone in need of assistance, especially when night is coming on and there are coyotes in these parts." She wanted to send him away to maintain the fierce independence that was all she had left, but exhaustion won out. Her hands were blistered and bleeding, her back ached, and she had not eaten since dawn. She watched as Graham pulled tools from his saddlebag and began working on the fence with the easy competence of a man who had spent his life working with his hands. "I cannot pay you," she said quietly. "Did not ask to be paid." "Then why are you helping me?" Graham paused in his work, looking at her with those steady brown eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I heard in town what folks are saying about you, and I think you are getting a raw deal. And because I know what it is like to lose someone you love and have the world expect you to just move on like it meant nothing." Something in his voice, a thread of old pain, made Penelope soften slightly. She picked up a hammer and worked alongside him in silence as the sky turned gold and pink, then deep purple. By the time the first stars appeared, the fence was secure and the cattle were safely contained. Graham gathered his tools and prepared to mount his horse. Penelope found herself reluctant to see him go, though she could not have explained why. "Thank you," she said. "Truly." He tipped his hat to her. "My name is Graham McKenna. I just hired on as foreman at the Davidson Ranch, so I will be around these parts. If you need help again, you just holler." "Penelope Lawson," she replied, "but I expect you already knew that." "I did," he admitted. "Whole town seems to have opinions about you, Mrs. Lawson. For what it is worth, I think you have every right to grieve your husband as long as you need to." He rode off into the darkness, and Penelope stood watching long after his silhouette had disappeared. That night, for the first time since Thomas died, she fell asleep without crying. Graham showed up again 3 days later, this time with 2 of his men and a wagon full of lumber. Penelope came out of the barn to find them already unloading posts and planks, and her first instinct was to order them off her property. But Graham held up a hand before she could speak. "Before you get your back up, hear me out," he said. "Old Davidson owes your late husband a debt. Thomas helped him out of a tight spot a few years back, would not take payment. Davidson heard about your situation and wanted to settle his accounts. He sent us over with materials and orders to fix whatever needs fixing. You can argue with him if you like, but he is a stubborn old cuss, and you will not win." Penelope knew the story Graham referred to. Thomas had helped pull Davidson's prize bull out of a ravine, risking his own neck in the process. Davidson had tried to pay him, but Thomas had waved him off, saying neighbors helped neighbors. The memory brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I would be grateful for the help," she said, her voice thick. The men worked all morning, replacing rotted fence posts, patching the barn roof, and reinforcing the corral. Penelope made lunch for all of them, stretching her supplies to feed 4 hungry men. They ate on the porch, balancing tin plates on their knees, and the easy camaraderie reminded her painfully of better times when Thomas had been alive, and the ranch had been full of hope and laughter. Graham's men headed back to the Davidson spread after lunch, but Graham lingered, helping Penelope move hay bales in the barn. They worked in companionable silence until he spoke suddenly, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said. "Cholera. We had been married only 18 months. Her family wanted me to marry her younger sister, said it was the decent thing to do, that Sarah would have wanted her sister taken care of. He paused, driving a pitchfork into a hay bale with more force than necessary. I could not do it. I liked her sister fine, but I did not love her, and it seemed like a betrayal of everything Sarah and I had together. Penelope stopped working, giving him her full attention. What did you do? Left Tennessee. Drifted west working cattle drives and ranch jobs. Sent money back to Sarah's family to help with her sister, but I could not be what they wanted me to be. He met her eyes across the dim barn. Point is, I understand what you are going through, and I think you are brave as hell for standing your ground. The town council does not think so, Penelope said bitterly. They think I am being selfish and difficult. They have given me until the end of summer to choose a husband or lose everything. That is horseshit, Graham said flatly. Pardon my language, but that land is yours. Your husband left it to you. In this town, a woman alone is seen as unnatural. They want me married off so they do not have to think about me or worry about me or acknowledge that I might be capable of running a ranch on my own. The words poured out of her, months of frustration and grief finding voice. Thomas and I were partners. He taught me everything about ranching, treated me like an equal. And now everyone acts like I was just keeping his bed warm and cannot possibly manage without a man telling me what to do. Graham was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. What if you had someone on paper, someone to satisfy the town council but who understood you were not ready for anything real? Penelope stared at him. Are you suggesting a marriage of convenience? I am suggesting that I could help you keep your ranch while you take the time you need to grieve and heal. No expectations, no pressure. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. Just a name on paper to get the vultures off your back. The offer hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting in equal measure. Penelope's mind raced through the implications, the gossip it would cause, the questions people would ask. But beneath all that, a small voice whispered that this might be her only chance to keep the life Thomas had built for them. Why would you do that? She asked. You barely know me. Graham leaned against a post, pushing his hat back slightly. Because someone should have done it for me when I needed it. Because I have seen enough of life to know that sometimes people need time to heal, and the world does not always give it to them. And because I think you loved your husband the way I loved my wife, and that kind of love deserves respect. What would you get out of it? He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. A friend, maybe, someone who understands, and the satisfaction of knowing I helped someone who needed it. Penelope sank down onto a hay bale, her legs suddenly weak. I need to think about this. Take all the time you need, Graham said. Offer stands as long as you need it to. Over the next 2 weeks, Graham became a regular presence at the ranch. He never pushed, never demanded anything from her, just showed up and worked alongside her, fixing things that had been broken for months, helping her move cattle to better grazing, teaching her things Thomas had never gotten around to showing her. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lost spouses, their childhoods, their hopes and dreams. Penelope found herself laughing for the first time in months, found herself looking forward to seeing his horse come up the road each morning. But the town's judgment only intensified. The church ladies organized a committee to visit her, sitting stiffly in her parlor while their leader, the pinch-faced Mrs. Alina Whitmore, delivered a lecture about Christian duty and proper behavior for widows. They had brought a list of suitable men, widowers and bachelors who had expressed interest in marrying her, complete with assessments of their financial situations and moral character. Mr. Harold Simmons is a pillar of the community, Mrs. Whitmore said, jabbing a finger at the list. He has been widowed 3 years and has 4 children who need a mother. He owns the largest dry goods store in town and could provide you with a comfortable life." Penelope gritted her teeth. Harold Simmons was 52 years old, had a wandering eye, and had made his opinion clear that wives should be seen and not heard. "I am not interested in Mr. Simmons." "Then perhaps young Mr. Peter Harrison," Mrs. Whitmore continued relentlessly. "He is only 28 and quite handsome. He is looking for a wife to help him establish his law practice. Mr. Harrison wants someone to host dinner parties and look pretty on his arm. He has made it clear he thinks ranching is beneath a lady's dignity." Mrs. Whitmore's expression grew cold. "Penelope, you are being unreasonable. You cannot expect to remain alone forever. It is not natural and it is not safe. A woman needs a husband's protection. I am managing just fine on my own. Are you?" Mrs. Whitmore's eyes were hard. "I have heard you have been receiving help from the Davidson foreman, that man McKenna. People are beginning to talk about the amount of time he spends here, alone with you. If you continue this way, you will destroy what little reputation you have left." Heat flooded Penelope's face, anger warring with embarrassment. "Graham McKenna has been nothing but a gentleman and a friend. If people choose to see something inappropriate in simple neighborly help, that says more about them than it does about either of us." The church ladies left in a huff, and Penelope stood on her porch watching them go, fury and despair churning in her stomach. She knew how quickly rumors could spread in a small town, how easily reputations could be destroyed. The last thing she wanted was to drag Graham into her mess, to have his kindness repaid with gossip and innuendo. When Graham arrived the next morning, she was waiting for him, her decision made. "I will accept your offer," she said without preamble, "if you are still willing." Graham dismounted slowly, studying her face. "What happened?" She told him about the church lady's visit, about the growing gossip, about the fear that her time was running out. Graham's jaw tightened as she spoke, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but he let her finish without interruption. "I want you to understand what you are agreeing to," he said when she fell silent. "This will be a real marriage in the eyes of the law and the town, but only that. I will move into the house, but I will take the spare room. I will help you run the ranch, and we will present ourselves as a married couple in public. But I meant what I said before. No expectations, no pressure. I will wait until you are ready for anything more, even if that day never comes." Penelope's throat tightened with gratitude and something else she could not quite name. "I do not deserve your kindness. You deserve more kindness than this town has shown you," Graham said firmly. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse with old man Davidson and his wife as witnesses. Penelope wore a simple blue dress, unable to bring herself to wear white, and Graham wore his best shirt and cleanest trousers. The Justice of the Peace, Judge Milton Crawford, looked disapproving throughout the brief ceremony, clearly having heard the gossip and drawn his own conclusions about the hasty marriage. "Do you, Graham McKenna, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Crawford intoned. "I do," Graham said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Penelope Lawson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Penelope's voice caught in her throat. She thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, of the guilt that gnawed at her for standing here beside another man. But she also thought of the ranch, of the life she would lose if she did not do this, and of Graham's steady kindness over the past weeks. "I do," she said. Judge Crawford pronounced them man and wife without enthusiasm, and Graham slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It felt strange and wrong, and Penelope had to fight the urge to yank it off. But when Graham met her eyes, his expression was understanding, and she found she could breathe again. The news spread through Fort Worth like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that the stubborn widow Lawson had finally married, though opinions were divided on whether the quick courtship was romantic or scandalous. The church ladies clucked their tongues and speculated about what had really been going on at that ranch all those weeks, while the men at the saloon placed bets on how long the marriage would last. Graham moved his belongings into the ranch house that evening, settling into the small spare room without comment. Penelope had prepared it as best she could, hanging fresh curtains and airing out the musty mattress, but she felt awkward and uncertain as she showed him where to put his things. "I will make supper," she said, desperate to escape to the familiar territory of the kitchen. They ate in near silence, the weight of what they had done settling over both of them. After the dishes were washed, Graham excused himself to check on the horses, giving Penelope space. She sat alone in the parlor, twisting the unfamiliar ring on her finger, wondering what Thomas would think of what she had done. The first weeks of the marriage were strange and stilted. They moved around each other carefully, polite as strangers, both trying to navigate this new arrangement. Graham rose before dawn and worked until dark, putting his back into every task on the ranch. Penelope cooked and cleaned and managed the household, occasionally working alongside him in the barn or corrals. They spoke little beyond what was necessary, though sometimes Penelope caught Graham watching her with an expression she could not quite read. The town's attitude shifted once the marriage was official. The censure and judgment eased, replaced by a grudging acceptance. Shopkeepers were civil again, extending credit without question now that Penelope had a husband to vouch for her. The church ladies nodded approval when she attended Sunday services with Graham at her side. But Penelope felt the loss of her independence keenly, even as she recognized that Graham never tried to control or limit her. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Penelope found Graham sitting on the porch in the twilight, a battered harmonica in his hands. He played softly, a melancholy tune that spoke of loneliness and longing, and she stood in the doorway listening until he finished. "That was beautiful," she said quietly, stepping out onto the porch. Graham looked up, startled. "Sorry, I did not mean to disturb you." "You did not." She sat in the rocking chair Thomas had made, leaving the other one for Graham. "Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me. It was about the only good thing he ever gave me." Graham turned the harmonica over in his hands. "I have not played much since Sarah died. It reminded me too much of happier times." "What made you play tonight?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I was thinking about her, about how she used to love it when I played for her. About how I would give anything to have just one more evening sitting on our porch, playing while she hummed along." He looked at Penelope, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "I was thinking about how you must feel the same way about Thomas, about all those little moments you miss." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks before she could stop them. No one had understood that before, the way she missed not just Thomas, but the tiny everyday moments that had made up their life together. The way he whistled while he worked, the way he kissed her forehead when he came in from the fields, the way he always saved the last biscuit for her at breakfast. "I miss him so much," she whispered. "Some days I can barely breathe from missing him." Graham set the harmonica aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I know. And I am not trying to replace him or make you forget him. I just want you to know that it is okay to grieve, okay to miss him. You do not have to pretend to be over it for my sake or anyone else's." Something broke open in Penelope's chest, a dam of grief and guilt she had been holding back for weeks. The sobs came hard and fast, and suddenly Graham was kneeling beside her chair, his arms around her, holding her while she cried into his shoulder. He did not try to quiet her or tell her it would be okay, just held her steady while the storm passed. When she finally pulled back, exhausted and wrung out, he handed her his bandana to wipe her face. "Better?" he asked gently. "I am sorry," she said. "I am so sorry. I should not have fallen apart like that." "Why not? You are hurting. There is no shame in that." Graham stood, returning to his chair but keeping his eyes on her face. "Penelope, I need you to understand something. I am not keeping score, waiting for you to be done grieving so you can turn your attention to me. I am here because I want to be and because I understand what you are going through. If all we ever are is friends and partners, that is enough." "But what about what you want?" she asked. "What about your life, your future? You deserve more than to be tied to a woman who might never be able to give you what you need." Graham smiled, sad and knowing. "What I need is to wake up every day and do good, honest work. What I need is to be around someone who understands loss and does not expect me to be someone I am not. What I need is to help someone who needed helping. You are giving me all that, Penelope. So, stop worrying about what you think you owe me and just let things be what they are." From that night on, something shifted between them. The walls they had carefully maintained began to crumble, and they started truly living together rather than just existing in the same space. Graham began playing his harmonica in the evenings, and Penelope would sit and listen, sometimes humming along. They talked over supper about their days, their dreams, their fears. Graham told her stories about the cattle drives he had worked, about the men he had met, and the country he had seen. Penelope shared memories of Thomas, finding that Graham did not flinch or look uncomfortable when she spoke of her late husband. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Graham had a knack for breeding cattle and an eye for good horseflesh. He made connections with buyers and negotiated fair prices for their stock. Penelope managed the books with meticulous attention, tracking every penny, making sure they had enough put aside for lean times. They worked as a team, each complementing the other's strengths, and slowly the ranch began to prosper. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in golds and russets, Graham taught Penelope to shoot properly. Thomas had shown her the basics, but Graham had been in the cavalry during the war and was an expert marksman. They spent Sunday afternoons setting up targets, and he patiently corrected her stance and aim until she could hit a can at 50 yards more often than not. "Why is this so important to you?" Penelope asked one day as she reloaded. Graham's expression grew serious. "Because you are alone out here most days while I am working the far pastures, because there are still outlaws and drifters passing through. Because I sleep better at night knowing you can protect yourself if you need to." The thought that he worried about her safety, that he cared enough to spend his one day of rest teaching her to shoot, warmed something in Penelope's chest. She was beginning to realize that what she felt for Graham was growing beyond gratitude or friendship, though she felt guilty even acknowledging it to herself. It seemed like a betrayal of Thomas, of the love they had shared. But Graham never pushed, never indicated that he expected or even wanted anything more from her. He was unfailingly respectful, always knocking before entering a room she occupied, always giving her space and privacy. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with longing in his eyes, but he always looked away when he realized she had noticed. Winter came hard and fast that year, bringing freezing rain and howling winds that chilled to the bone. The ranch work became brutal, and Penelope found herself working alongside Graham more often. Both of them bundled in layers of wool and oilcloth as they broke ice in water troughs and carried hay to the cattle. They moved through the days in exhausted companionship, and at night they would sit by the fire, too tired to talk much, just taking comfort in each other's presence. One particularly brutal night, Penelope woke to strange sounds from Graham's room. She crept to his door and listened, her heart sinking as she realized he was having a nightmare, his voice rough and anguished as he called out for Sarah. She hesitated, then pushed the door open and approached his bed carefully. "Graham," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "Graham, wake up." He jerked awake with a gasp, his eyes wild and unfocused in the darkness. It took him a moment to recognize her, and when he did, shame flooded his face. "I am sorry," he rasped. "Did I wake you?" "You were dreaming," she said gently. "About Sarah," he nodded, scrubbing his hands over his face. "It was the day she died. I dream about it sometimes, about watching her slip away and not being able to do anything to save her." Penelope sat on the edge of his bed without thinking, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I dream about Thomas's accident. About the moment they came to tell me he was gone. I wake up and for a split second I forget he is dead, and then I remember and it is like losing him all over again." Graham's fingers tightened around hers. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But I think maybe the pain changes. Maybe it becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." They sat in the darkness for a long time, hands linked, drawing comfort from the only person who truly understood. When Penelope finally returned to her own room, she lay awake until dawn, thinking about the man sleeping down the hall and the confused tangle of emotions in her chest. Christmas came, and Penelope made a special effort to prepare a real celebration. She baked pies and roasted a chicken, decorated the house with pine boughs and red berries. Graham had ridden into Fort Worth and returned with mysterious packages that he hid in the barn. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts by the fire. Graham gave her a beautiful leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover, telling her it was for recording her thoughts or ranch business or anything else she wanted. Penelope gave him a new harmonica, finer than the battered one he played, along with a warm wool scarf she had knitted in secret. "This is too much," Graham said, his voice thick with emotion as he ran his fingers over the gleaming instrument. "It is not nearly enough," Penelope said. "Not for everything you have done for me." Graham looked at her across the firelight, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Penelope, I need you to know something. I need you to know that this stopped being just an arrangement for me a long time ago. I have feelings for you, real feelings, but I meant what I said. I will wait until you are ready, and if you are never ready, I will still be grateful for every day I get to spend with you." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. She had known on some level that Graham cared for her, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I do not know if I can be what you need," she whispered. "You already are," Graham said simply. "You are my friend and my partner, and that means more to me than you know." As winter deepened into the new year of 1878, Penelope found herself watching Graham with new awareness. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he worked, the gentle patience he showed with the animals. She noticed how her heart lifted when she saw him riding back to the house at day's end, how empty the house felt on the rare occasions when he had to be away overnight. She was falling in love with him, and the realization filled her with equal parts joy and guilt. How could she love another man when Thomas had been dead barely a year and a half? What kind of wife did that make her? But at the same time, she could not deny the way Graham made her feel safe and valued and understood in ways she had never experienced before. One evening in late January, Penelope was washing dishes when Graham came up behind her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth of his body close to hers. "Penny," he said softly, using the nickname he had started calling her, "I have been thinking." She turned to face him, her hands still dripping soapy water. "About what?" "About the fact that we have been married 6 months, and I have never kissed you, Not even at our wedding." His eyes searched hers. "I know we agreed this would be an arrangement, nothing more, but I would very much like to kiss you, if you would allow it." Penelope's mouth went dry. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to feel his lips on hers, to let herself have this. But the larger part of her was terrified, caught in a web of grief and guilt and burgeoning love. "Graham, you are not ready," he finished for her, his voice gentle. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that when you are ready, if you ever are, I am here." He stepped back, putting proper distance between them, and Penelope wanted to cry from frustration with herself. Why could she not just let herself be happy? Why did she have to make everything so complicated? The answer came to her late that night as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was not just guilt about Thomas that held her back. It was fear. Fear that if she let herself love Graham fully, she would lose him too. Fear that happiness was something fleeting and dangerous, something that would be ripped away from her the moment she dared to reach for it. Fear that she was not strong enough to survive losing another person she loved. But as winter gave way to early spring, as the world began to green and bloom again, Penelope found herself thinking more and more about what Graham had said. About how he would wait as long as she needed. About how he had feelings for her. About how he had asked permission to kiss her rather than simply taking what he wanted. One warm afternoon in March, Penelope was hanging laundry when Graham came riding back from Fort Worth with supplies. He dismounted and helped her carry the heavy baskets, his shoulder brushing against hers, and Penelope felt a jolt of awareness run through her. She watched him walk back to the barn, admiring the easy confidence of his movements, and made a decision. That evening, after supper, she asked him to walk with her. They strolled through the pastures in the golden light of sunset, not speaking, just being together. When they reached the small creek that ran through the property, Penelope stopped and turned to face Graham. "I have been thinking about what you said," she began, her heart racing. "About kissing me." Graham went very still. And I think I would like that," Penelope said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I would like that very much." Graham stepped closer, moving slowly as if afraid she might bolt. His hands came up to cup her face, his calloused palms gentle against her skin. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Because once I kiss you, Penny, I am not sure I will be able to go back to the way things were." "I do not want to go back," she said, and realized it was true. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of feeling guilty for wanting to be happy again. Thomas loved me, and he would want me to live, not just survive." Graham's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and when his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of patient longing. Penelope's hands came up to grip his shirt, steadying herself as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The kiss deepened, and she felt something inside her that had been frozen for so long finally begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penny," he said. "I have loved you for months, and I will keep loving you for as long as you will let me." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but they were tears of release rather than grief. "I love you too," she whispered. "I do not know when it happened, but I love you, Graham McKenna." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Penelope felt like a different person. The guilt was still there, a small ache in her chest, but it no longer consumed her. She could love Graham and still honor Thomas's memory. She could build a new life without erasing the old one. That night, Penelope stood outside Graham's bedroom door for a long time before knocking softly. He opened it immediately, his expression questioning, and she took a deep breath. "I do not want to sleep alone anymore," she said. If you are willing, I would like you to move into my room, into our room." Graham's eyes darkened with desire and love and understanding. "Are you certain? I do not want to rush you." "I am certain," Penelope said firmly. "I want to be your wife in every way, Graham. I want to build a real marriage with you, a real life." He gathered her into his arms, holding her close, and she felt his heart hammering against her chest. "You have no idea how long I have wanted to hear you say that," he murmured into her hair. They moved slowly that night, learning each other with gentle touches and whispered endearments. Graham was patient and careful, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. And Penelope discovered that it was possible to be with one man while still honoring the memory of another, that her heart was big enough to hold both love and loss without diminishing either. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened in ways Penelope had never imagined possible. Graham moved his belongings into the main bedroom, and they fell into new rhythms of intimacy and partnership. They worked together during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, and Penelope found herself laughing more, smiling more, engaging with life in ways she had not thought possible after Thomas's death. The townspeople noticed the change in her. Where before she had been pale and drawn, now she glowed with health and happiness. The church ladies clucked approvingly, satisfied that marriage had tamed the stubborn widow and made her properly content. Old man Davidson winked at Graham and said he had done good work bringing Penelope back to life. Only Judge Crawford remained skeptical, muttering that the whole situation had been improper from the start. But Penelope found she no longer cared what the town thought. She had Graham and the ranch and a future that looked bright with possibility. She had grieved Thomas properly, had honored his memory, and now she was allowing herself to live again. It felt like a gift, precious and hard-won. In May, as the wildflowers bloomed across the Texas prairie, Graham surprised Penelope with a trip to San Antonio. They took the train, a luxury Penelope had not experienced since before her first marriage, and spent 3 days in the bustling city. Graham showed her the Alamo and bought her a beautiful emerald dress that matched her eyes. They danced in the hotel ballroom, ate at fine restaurants, and made love in a proper bed with clean sheets and privacy. "Thank you for this," Penelope said on their last night, curled against Graham's chest. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal." Graham kissed the top of her head. "You were worth waiting for, Penny. You are worth everything." When they returned to the ranch, Penelope found she saw everything with new eyes. This was not just Thomas's ranch anymore, the place where she had loved and lost. It was her and Graham's ranch, the foundation of their life together. They made plans to expand the herd, to build a new barn, to hire on more hands so Graham would not have to work quite so hard. Summer arrived in full force, bringing scorching heat, and the constant work of keeping the cattle and horses watered and healthy. Penelope and Graham worked from dawn to dusk, but at night they would sit on the porch in the cooling air, Graham playing his harmonica while Penelope wrote in the journal he had given her. She was documenting their life together, the ranch operations, her thoughts and feelings. It helped her process everything she had been through, all the changes and growth. In August, Penelope realized her monthly cycle was late. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to be disappointed. But when another week passed, she could no longer deny the possibility. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex swirl of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of carrying Graham's child. But also fear, because she and Thomas had tried for years to conceive and never succeeded. And underneath it all, a thread of guilt, because this should have been Thomas's child, this should have been the family they built together. She waited until she was certain before telling Graham. They were in the barn one evening, tending to a mare that was close to foaling when Penelope finally worked up the courage. "Graham, I need to tell you something." He looked up from checking the mare's legs, his expression immediately concerned. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, I am not hurt. I am pregnant." Graham froze, his eyes going wide. For a long moment he just stared at her, and Penelope felt panic flutter in her chest. What if he did not want a child? What if this changed everything between them? Then Graham let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and swept Penelope up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Penny, we are going to have a baby. You are happy?" She asked unnecessarily, seeing the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Graham said, setting her down gently as if she might break. "I never thought I would get this chance again, never thought I would have a family. You have given me everything, Penny, everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope suffered through months of morning sickness that left her weak and exhausted. Graham worried constantly, hovering over her until she threatened to brain him with a frying pan if he did not give her some space. But his devotion touched her deeply. The way he took over the household chores without complaint, the way he made sure she rested and ate even when she did not feel like it. As fall arrived and her belly swelled with their child, Penelope found herself thinking often about Thomas. She talked to Graham about it one night, needing him to understand. "I loved Thomas," she said quietly. "I will always love him in a way, but what I feel for you is different. Deeper, maybe, because it is built on so much more than just passion or attraction. It is built on understanding and respect and shared grief, and all the time you spent waiting for me to be ready." Graham took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I know you loved him, Penny, and I am not threatened by that. The fact that you can love again after losing him is a testament to how strong you are, not a betrayal of what you had together." "I wish he could have met you," Penelope said. "I think you two would have been friends." "I would like to think so," Graham agreed. "Any man who loved you and treated you well is a man I would have respected." The baby came in late February of 1879, during a cold snap that froze the water troughs and turned the ground hard as stone. The labor was long and difficult, and Graham paced the floor outside the bedroom while the midwife worked. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, Graham burst through the door to find Penelope exhausted but beaming, a tiny red-faced infant cradled in her arms. "It is a boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy baby boy." Graham approached the bed slowly, reverently, his eyes fixed on the small bundle. Penelope shifted the baby so he could see better. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked. Graham's hands trembled as he took the baby, cradling him awkwardly but carefully. "He is perfect," Graham breathed. "Penny, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. Graham looked at her, understanding passing between them. "Thomas," he said. "His middle name should be Thomas, to honor the man who came before me. And his first name should be Samuel, after my father, despite everything, because I want to give this child a better version of that name than I had." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. "Samuel Thomas McKenna," she said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Little Samuel was a good baby, rarely fussy, with his father's brown eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Graham was completely smitten, spending every moment he could with his son. Penelope watched her husband sing lullabies and change diapers and walk the floor at night when Samuel could not sleep, and her heart swelled with love for both of them. The ranch continued to prosper. With the money they had saved and the profits from their growing herd, Graham hired 2 permanent ranch hands, good men who worked hard and treated Penelope with respect. This freed up Graham to spend more time with his family, and freed up Penelope to focus on recovering from childbirth and caring for Samuel. When Samuel was 3 months old, Penelope took him to visit Thomas's grave for the first time. She sat in the grass beside the simple headstone, the baby sleeping in her arms, and told Thomas everything that had happened. "I hope you understand," she whispered. "I hope you know that I loved you with everything I had, and that loving Graham does not diminish what we had together. I think you would approve of him, Thomas. I think you would be glad I found someone who treats me with such kindness." A warm breeze stirred her hair, and Penelope chose to take it as a sign of blessing. She placed a bunch of wildflowers on the grave and walked back to where Graham waited with the wagon, ready to take his family home. As Samuel grew from an infant into a curious, active toddler, the ranch became a place of laughter and life again. Penelope watched her son learn to walk on the same floors where she had paced in grief, watched him play in the barn where she had once hidden to cry. The ghosts of her past were still there, but they no longer haunted her. They were simply part of her story, woven into the fabric of who she had become. On their second wedding anniversary, Graham took Penelope back to the spot by the creek where they had shared their first kiss. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket. "I had it engraved," Graham said, opening it to show her. On one side was a tiny photograph of Thomas, young and smiling. On the other was a photograph of Graham and Penelope with baby Samuel. "How did you get Thomas's photograph?" Penelope asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I asked old man Davidson. He had one from when Thomas worked for him years ago." Graham fastened the locket around her neck. "I wanted you to have them both, Penny, the past and the present together." Penelope threw her arms around Graham's neck, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much," she said. "I love you more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Graham said. "And I want you to know that I am grateful for every moment, every day I get to spend with you and Samuel. You gave me a second chance at happiness, Penny, and I do not take that lightly." As the years passed, the ranch grew and prospered. They added more cattle, built the new barn, and eventually constructed a larger house with proper bedrooms for their growing family. Penelope gave birth to 2 more children. A daughter they named Sarah Grace in honor of Graham's first wife, and another son they called James. The children grew up happy and healthy, learning to ride and rope and work the land alongside their parents. Fort Worth grew too, transforming from a dusty frontier town into a proper city with electric lights and paved streets. The old prejudices and rigid expectations that had once nearly destroyed Penelope began to fade as new people arrived and old ways changed. The church ladies who had once judged her so harshly eventually came to respect her as a successful rancher and devoted mother. Graham never stopped being grateful for what he had been given. Every morning, he woke beside Penelope and marveled that this was his life now. Every evening, he sat on the porch with his children playing at his feet and his wife beside him, and felt like the richest man in Texas. He taught his children to value patience and kindness, to wait for the right person rather than settling for convenience, to honor the past while building the future. Penelope wrote everything down in the journals Graham gave her each Christmas, documenting their life together for future generations. She wrote about the hard times and the good times, about grief and healing, about second chances and unexpected love. She wrote about the importance of standing firm in your convictions, of refusing to let others dictate your path, of taking the time you need to heal before moving forward. And she wrote about Graham, about the man who had appeared in her darkest hour and said the words that changed everything. "I will wait until you are ready." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Graham organized a grand celebration. Friends and neighbors came from all over the county to help them commemorate a decade of marriage. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, children running wild in the yard. Old man Davidson, now stooped with age but still sharp as a tack, raised a glass in toast. "To Graham and Penelope," he said loudly, "who proved that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for." Everyone cheered and drank, and Penelope looked around at the life they had built together. Samuel was 9 years old now, tall for his age and already showing an aptitude for ranching. Sarah was 6, sweet and gentle with a love for the horses. Little James was 3, all energy and mischief. This was her family, her life, hard-won and deeply cherished. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were tucked in bed, Penelope and Graham stood on their porch looking out over the land they had built together. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light, and the cattle lowed softly in the distance. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Penelope asked. "If the town council had not forced my hand, if you had not offered to help," Graham pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I think things worked out exactly as they were supposed to," he said. "We both needed time to heal, and we gave each other that. We both needed someone who understood loss, and we found each other. I would not change a single thing, Penny, because every moment, good and bad, led us here." Penelope leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling safe and loved and content. "I was so angry when they tried to force me to remarry," she reflected. "I felt like they were trying to erase Thomas, to pretend our love had not mattered. But now I see that I can honor what I had with him while also building something new with you. Both truths can exist at the same time." "That is what I tried to tell you from the beginning," Graham said with a smile in his voice. "But you had to come to it in your own time, in your own way." "Thank you for waiting," Penelope whispered. "Thank you for giving me that time." "Always," Graham said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I would wait a lifetime for you, Penny McKenna." They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had lost everything and found each other, who had built a life and a love that honored the past while embracing the future. The ranch stretched out around them, testament to their hard work and partnership. And inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. Penelope thought about the scared, grieving widow she had been, standing alone in Fort Worth's dusty street with a letter demanding she remarry. She thought about the stubborn determination that had made her refuse, the willingness to lose everything rather than betray her own heart. And she thought about Graham, riding into her life with patience and kindness, and a willingness to wait as long as she needed. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "I love you with everything I am, Graham McKenna." "And I love you," he replied, cupping her face in his hands. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Penelope felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt the first time he kissed her by the creek. Some things, she thought, never got old. Some loves only deepened with time. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing the same steady patience his father had demonstrated. Sarah developed a gift for training horses, gentling even the wildest mustangs with her calm presence. James proved to be a natural businessman, helping his mother manage the ranch accounts and negotiate with buyers. Penelope and Graham aged together gracefully, their love deepening with every shared sunrise and sunset. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and personal challenges, always facing everything as a united front. When Penelope's hair began to gray, Graham told her she had never been more beautiful. When Graham's back started aching from decades of ranch work, Penelope rubbed liniment into his muscles and told him stories to make him laugh. They attended Samuel's wedding when he married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch and welcomed their first grandchild with tears of joy. They watched Sarah marry a horse breeder from Oklahoma and move north to start her own training operation. They helped James establish his own ranch on land they deeded to him, seeing him settled with a strong-minded woman who reminded Penelope of herself in younger days. On the 20th anniversary of Penelope's marriage to Graham, they took a trip back to the spot where their house had once stood before they built the larger one. The old structure was still there, used now for storage, and they walked through it hand in hand, remembering. "This is where you slept that first night after we were married," Penelope said, pointing to what had been Graham's small room. "I remember lying in bed wondering what I had done, if I had made a terrible mistake. And this is where I lay awake wondering if you would ever see me as anything more than a convenience," Graham replied, "wondering if I had been a fool to think I could ever mean something to you." They moved to the main bedroom, and Penelope ran her hand over the old bed frame. "This is where you held me while I cried for Thomas, where you let me grieve without judgment or pressure. And this is where you first told me you loved me," Graham said softly, "where we finally became husband and wife in truth, not just on paper." They sat together on the dusty bed, shoulders touching, and Penelope felt the weight of all the years between that first night and this moment. "We have built a good life," she said, "better than I ever imagined possible after Thomas died." "We built it together," Graham corrected. "Every piece of it, side by side." As they walked back to their current house, Penelope thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The grief and the healing, the patience and the love, the willingness to wait and the courage to try again. She thought about the narrow-minded townspeople who had tried to force her into a loveless marriage, never imagining that their cruelty would ultimately lead her to a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. Life continued its steady rhythm. The ranch became one of the most successful in the county, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. The McKenna name became synonymous with integrity and hard work, and young people throughout the region looked up to Graham and Penelope as examples of what a marriage should be. But it was never easy. There were still hard times, still moments of struggle and doubt. When a severe drought hit in the mid-1880s, they lost a quarter of their herd and had to make difficult decisions about which hands to keep employed. When influenza swept through Fort Worth, they quarantined themselves at the ranch and prayed their children would be spared. When Graham's mother passed away and he had to return to Georgia to settle her affairs, Penelope held down the ranch alone and proved she was every bit as capable as her husband. Through it all, they relied on each other. They talked through problems, made decisions together, supported each other's choices. They never let the sun set on their anger, always working through disagreements before bed. They made time for each other even when life was busy and demanding, stealing moments of intimacy and connection in the midst of chaos. "The secret," Graham told Samuel one day when his son asked for marriage advice, "is to choose each other every single day. Not just once at the altar, but every morning when you wake up and every night when you go to bed. You choose to love, to be patient, to work together. That is what makes a marriage last." Penelope, overhearing, smiled and added, "And you must give each other room to grow and change. The person you marry will not be exactly the same person 10 years or 20 years later. You have to love who they become, not just who they were." As the century drew toward its close, Penelope and Graham found themselves in the unique position of being elder statesmen of the community. People sought their advice on everything from ranching to relationships. The church ladies who had once judged Penelope so harshly were long dead or retired, replaced by a new generation that knew her only as the successful ranch owner and devoted wife and mother. One day, a young widow came to visit Penelope. Her name was Margaret, and her husband had been killed in a ranching accident just 3 months earlier. The town was already pressuring her to remarry, to give up her late husband's small spread to someone who could properly manage it. She had heard stories about Penelope and Graham and wanted advice. Penelope sat with Margaret on the porch, looking out over the land she and Graham had built together, and felt the past and present collide. "Tell me," she said gently, "what does your heart tell you to do?" "I do not know," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I loved my husband. The thought of marrying someone else, of sharing a bed with another man, makes me feel sick. But I cannot run the ranch alone, and I do not want to lose everything he worked for." "Then do not marry someone else," Penelope said firmly. "Not yet, anyway. Not until you are ready, if that day ever comes." "But how can I keep the ranch? Everyone says a woman alone cannot manage a spread, that I need a husband." Penelope smiled. "Those are the same things they said to me. And I will tell you what someone once told me, that it is possible to find help without sacrificing your independence or betraying your grief. The right person will not push you or pressure you. They will give you the time and space you need to heal." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Did you really make him wait?" "For months," Penelope confirmed. "And he never once made me feel guilty about it or tried to rush me. He waited because he understood what I was going through, because he had lost someone too. And when I was finally ready, it was my choice, my decision." That made all the difference. She sent Margaret away with practical advice about managing the ranch and a promise to help however she could. And she made sure to introduce the young widow to a few good men in the area who might be willing to help without expectations. Men cut from the same cloth as Graham. As Penelope watched Margaret ride away, Graham came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. "Teaching the next generation?" he asked. "Trying to spare her the worst of what I went through," Penelope replied. "Trying to make sure she knows she has options, that she does not have to rush or settle." "You are a good woman, Penny McKenna," Graham said, kissing her temple. "I am blessed to call you my wife." They grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing down. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experience and unwavering commitment. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to their children, and eventually their grandchildren, content to watch the next generation carry on what they had built. On a warm evening in the spring of 1897, nearly 20 years after their wedding, Penelope and Graham sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They were both in their 60s now, weathered by time and sun and hard work, but still strong, still vital. "Do you have any regrets?" Graham asked suddenly. "Anything you wish had been different?" Penelope thought about the question seriously, as she always did when Graham asked her something important. She thought about Thomas and the life they had started to build before his death. She thought about the pain and grief and loneliness of widowhood. She thought about the town's judgment and the difficult choice she had been forced to make. "I regret that Thomas died so young," she said finally. "I regret the years we did not get to have together. But I do not regret anything that came after, because it led me to you. And I cannot regret you, Graham. I cannot regret this life we have built, or the children we have raised, or the love we have shared." Graham squeezed her hand. "I feel the same way about Sarah. I miss her still, even after all these years, but I am grateful for what I have with you. I am grateful that you took a chance on a broken-down cowboy who had nothing to offer but patience and understanding." "You had everything to offer," Penelope said firmly. You gave me time to heal. You gave me respect and partnership, and a love that honored my past instead of trying to erase it. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life beyond what I thought possible. That is everything, Graham. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked, shoulders touching. They did not need words anymore. After 20 years of marriage and a lifetime of shared experiences, they could communicate with a look, a touch, a shared breath. Penelope thought about the scared young widow she had been, standing alone in Fort Worth's dusty street, refusing to be bullied into a loveless marriage. She thought about her fierce determination to honor Thomas's memory, to take the time she needed to grieve properly. And she thought about Graham, riding into her life at exactly the right moment, offering help with no strings attached, willing to wait as long as she needed. "Thank you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "Thank you for waiting." Graham lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "And thank you for being worth the wait," he replied. "Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for giving me a second chance at happiness." They sat together until the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the ranch they had built together. Inside the house, generations of family gathered for a reunion, their laughter and voices drifting through the open windows. This was their legacy, Penelope thought. Not just the land and the cattle and the buildings, but the love they had modeled, the patience they had demonstrated, the proof that healing was possible and second chances were real. As they finally rose to join their family inside, Graham paused and looked back at the land stretching out in the moonlight. "We did good, Penny," he said. "We did real good." "We did," she agreed, slipping her arm through his. "We built something that will last long after we are gone." They walked into the house together, welcomed by the warmth and noise of family, and Penelope felt complete. She had loved and lost and loved again. She had grieved and healed and built a new life from the ashes of the old one. She had stood firm in her convictions and been rewarded with a love deeper and truer than anything she had imagined possible. And it had all started with a simple promise: "I will wait until you are ready." Those words had given her the gift of time, the space to heal, the freedom to choose love on her own terms. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The years continued their steady march, and Penelope and Graham aged together with grace and dignity. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, their house bursting with love and laughter. They told stories about the early days, about Graham showing up to fix fences and Penelope's stubborn independence, about the slow building of trust and affection that had eventually bloomed into deep love. "Tell us about the first time Papa said he loved you," Sarah's daughter begged, and Penelope smiled at the memory. "We were standing by the creek on the south pasture," she said. "It was sunset, and I had finally worked up the courage to let him kiss me. And after, he looked at me with those serious brown eyes and said he loved me, that he had loved me for months." "And what did Grandma say?" one of the boys asked. "I said I loved him too," Penelope replied, reaching over to take Graham's hand. "And I have said it every day since, for 25 years. Graham raised her hand to his lips, his eyes twinkling. "And I plan to keep hearing it for at least 25 more. The family laughed and applauded, and the celebration continued long into the night. Penelope watched her grandchildren playing, saw the love and respect between her children and their spouses, and felt profound gratitude for the life she had been given. It had not been easy and it had not been simple, but it had been worth every moment of struggle and pain. As the new century dawned, bringing with it automobiles and telephones and all manner of modern conveniences, Penelope and Graham found themselves living in a world vastly different from the one they had known in their youth. But their love remained constant, unchanged by the passage of time or the march of progress. They were in their 70s when Penelope fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came and went, shaking his head gravely, and the children gathered at the ranch, fearing the worst. But Penelope was not ready to leave yet. She had too much still to live for, too much love yet to give and receive. She fought the illness with the same stubborn determination that had carried her through widowhood and grief, and slowly, painfully, she recovered. Graham barely left her side during those dark weeks, holding her hand, wiping her fevered brow, praying for her to pull through. When she finally opened her eyes and smiled at him, he wept openly with relief. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said raggedly. "I thought you were going to leave me." "Not yet," Penelope whispered, her voice hoarse from coughing. "I am not finished with you yet, Graham McKenna." They had several more good years together, years of quiet contentment and deep companionship. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and start families of their own. They saw the ranch continue to thrive under the management of their children. They sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset, grateful for another day together. When Graham's heart finally gave out in the spring of 1904, quick and painless while he slept, Penelope knew that she would not be far behind. They had been married 26 years, together for nearly 27, and she could not imagine continuing without him. But she had learned from her grief over Thomas that love did not end with death, that the people we lose remain part of us forever. She buried Graham beside Thomas in the Fort Worth cemetery, placing matching headstones that told the stories of two good men who had loved her well. At the funeral, surrounded by family and friends, Penelope stood tall and dry-eyed, drawing on the strength Graham had helped her build over their years together. "He waited for me when I was not ready to love again," she told the gathered mourners. "He gave me time to heal, time to grieve, time to find myself. And then he loved me with everything he had for over 25 years. I am who I am because of the patience and kindness he showed me, and I will carry his love with me for whatever time I have left." Penelope lived 3 more years, long enough to see the ranch secure in the hands of the next generation, long enough to hold her first great-grandchild, long enough to write the final entries in the journals Graham had given her over the years. She documented everything, leaving a complete record of their life together for future generations to read and learn from. On a warm evening in June of 1907, Penelope Lawson McKenna passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hands folded over a photograph of Graham and a lock of Thomas's hair that she had kept for 30 years. Her children found her in the morning, a smile on her weathered face, looking more peaceful than she had since Graham's death. They buried her between her 2 husbands, her grave connecting them in death as her heart had connected them in life. The headstone read simply, "Penelope Lawson McKenna. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She loved well and was well loved." At the funeral, Samuel read from his mother's journals, sharing her story with those gathered. He told how she had refused to be pressured into a loveless remarriage, how she had stood firm in the face of the town's judgment, how Graham had appeared and offered her the gift of time. He read her words about healing and second chances, about patience and love, about honoring the past while building the future. "My mother taught me that real love waits," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "It does not push or pressure or demand. It offers support and understanding and gives the gift of time." My father understood that, and because he was willing to wait, they built something beautiful and lasting. That is the legacy they leave us, not just this ranch, but the example of what love can be when it is patient and kind and true. The McKenna ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding to what Penelope and Graham had built. The story of how they came together became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that the best things in life are worth waiting for. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the Texas prairie, people swear they can see two figures standing on the porch of the old ranch house, hands linked, watching the sky turn gold and pink. Locals say it is the ghosts of Penelope and Graham, still together, still loving each other, their story living on long after they have gone. The journals Penelope kept were eventually donated to the local historical society, where they became treasured documents of life in frontier Texas. Historians and researchers pored over her detailed accounts of ranching, marriage, loss, and love. Young women facing their own struggles found inspiration in her story, proof that it was possible to stand firm in your convictions and still find happiness. The town of Fort Worth grew into a bustling modern city, but the McKenna Ranch remained, a piece of living history preserved by generations of family who understood the importance of what Penelope and Graham had built together. The house was eventually added to the historical register, and tours were given highlighting the story of the widow who refused to remarry until she was ready, and the cowboy who understood that real love waits. In the end, theirs was a love story that transcended time and circumstance, a testament to the power of patience, the importance of respect, and the healing nature of true partnership. Penelope had loved deeply twice, each time differently but no less truly, and in doing so had proven that the human heart was capable of infinite depths. Her story became a beacon for others facing loss and pressure to move on before they were ready. It became a reminder that grief deserves respect, that healing takes time, and that the right person will understand and wait. And most importantly, it became proof that second chances are real, that life after loss is possible, and that love can bloom even in the darkest of circumstances when tended with patience and care. The last entry in Penelope's final journal, written just days before her death, summed up the lesson of her remarkable life. I have loved two good men in my time on this earth, and both loves were real and true and worthy. Thomas taught me what it was to be a partner, to work side by side toward shared dreams. Graham taught me that it is possible to love again after loss, that the heart can expand to hold both grief and joy. To anyone reading this who has loved and lost, know that it is okay to take your time. Know that the right person will wait. Know that your grief is valid and your healing is important. And know that when you are finally ready, when you finally open your heart again, it will be more beautiful than you can imagine because of everything you have survived. Wait for someone who understands this. Wait for someone who says, I will wait until you are ready. That is the person worth building a life with. And so the story ends where it began, with a woman who refused to be rushed into love before she was ready, and a man who understood that the best things in life are worth waiting for. Their love, built on a foundation of mutual respect, patient understanding, and deep compassion, lasted until death and beyond, a shining example of what is possible when two people choose each other every single day, through grief and joy, through struggle and triumph, through all the seasons of life. They lived well, loved deeply, and left a legacy that continues to inspire all who hear their story, proof that happily ever after is possible, even after the darkest of beginnings.